Good morning, Shavua Tov. With permission of the Deputy Ambassador, I want to start by telling you a story. One of the places I work in Israel is at the Sheba Medical Center, Tel Shomer Hospital. It's the main hospital in Israel. It's the largest medical center in the Middle East. It's an incredible place. About a year and a half ago, we had a Palestinian patient, an 8-year-old child from Gaza. There are many Palestinian children from Gaza treated at the hospital. As much as a quarter of the patients in the children's hospital are from... Oh. Is that better?
Yeah.
Very good. As many as 25% of the children in the children's hospital at Sheba at any given time are patients from Gaza. Now, this 8-year-old was sick with a very rare form of blood cancer, and it was clear that he would die unless he received a bone marrow transplant. And as you know, bone marrow transplants usually need to come from relatives who share the same genetic makeup. Problem was that his relatives were all in Gaza, and it's not so easy for Gazans to come to Israel, and it's not so easy for Israeli doctors to go to Gaza. But the hospital used all the connections that it has. Shimon Peres, the president of Israel, has a son-in-law, Professor Rafi Walden, who's the deputy director of the hospital. And he used his connections to get permission for the Ministry of Defense. We managed to get 2 doctors into Gaza to test this young 8-year-old Palestinian's siblings, his brothers and sisters, his parents. And we found one brother, an 18-year-old brother, who was an almost perfect match. He would be the perfect bone marrow donor. But the Israeli security services didn't want to let him into Israel because he was a Hamas activist with clear ties to Hamas terrorists, operatives in Gaza. What are you going to do? And the hospital applied pressure again on the Ministry of Defense and the security services, and we got permission to bring this 18-year-old brother to Israel so that he could donate his bone marrow and save his 8-year-old brother's life. And it was Friday afternoon that he was brought to the hospital. And it's a very dangerous procedure. Within a 24-hour window, you take the sick patient, you use drugs to depress his immune system, harvest the bone marrow from the donor, from the brother, and transplant. We began the procedure. Friday night at midnight, it was time to harvest the bone marrow from the 18-year-old Hamas brother who was brought from Gaza. And lo and behold, he's gone. Disappeared. Nowhere to be found. One of the nurses said, you know what, I saw about an hour ago there were 2 Israeli security service agents who came and they took him away. Midnight, Friday night, Shabbat. What are you going to do? Director of the hospital, Professor Rodstein, is called. He calls the Prime Minister's office. He got Dubi Weissglass, who at the time was Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister, who calls the head of the security agency. At 2 a.m., the security agency says, yes, we took him away. Why? You remember they didn't want to let him come to Israel. They were worried about him. They were monitoring his cell phone conversations. And from within the Israeli hospital, that this 18-year-old young man was brought to, in order to save the life of his 8-year-old brother, he had been on the phone giving instructions and details to his Hamas masters in Gaza on how to get past security at the hospital and blow the place out. Now remember, we're the monsters. Right? We're the occupiers, we're the monsters. The director of the hospital said to the security chief, I don't care what you do with him, but bring him back. We need his bone marrow. We have a responsibility to save the 8-year-old's life. And they brought him back at 4 in the morning in handcuffs and leg irons so that he could donate bone marrow and save his 8-year-old brother's life. This is a true story about 2 years ago. So why do I tell you the story now? I'm sure that this story, by the way, I wanted to publicize the story. When I came to work on Sunday morning, the director of the hospital told me the story. I wanted to publicize it, called the New York Times correspondent in Jerusalem, at the time was Ethan Brunner, and tell him the story. And the security agency said no. Why? That's another conversation. Stories like this make us angry. They make us indignant. It fits with the general unfairness that we all feel in the way that the world relates to and treats Israel. As if we are the root cause of the conflict and Israel is the evil party. And yet we know the humanitarian way in which Israel approaches treatment of Palestinians and wishes to seek to solve the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and it's the Palestinian side that remains intransigent, and if they could, they would blow up the hospitals that treat Palestinian youth, at least those who are supporters of the Hamas. Now, you all know that the world has become largely unfriendly to Israel. Boycott, divestment, sanctions, UN resolutions. And yet today, I want to argue before you, and here we get right into the content of my talk, that we shouldn't be depressed. Because if you take a broader look at things, Israel is winning. And despite the growth of radical Islam in the region, and despite what we all feel and see in our kishkas, in our gut, that the world has become unfriendly to Israel, if you take a broader look at things, we ought to be encouraged, not discouraged. We need to be optimistic, not pessimistic. There are many, many, many good reasons for which we can take encouragement and know that we are on the right path. And I want to list for you today and discuss with you 10 factors, 10 items that we can clearly delineate, which make it clear that our way, Israel's path forward, is bright and optimistic. So let's begin. Number 1, BDS. You all know what that stands for, correct? It's the phrase that stands for boycott, divestment, and sanctions. It's become almost the code word for an international campaign to delegitimize Israel. Well, let's take a look at the BDS effort around the world. Has it succeeded? Have major international corporations stopped buying Israeli technology? By and large, have tourists stopped coming to Israel? Are international artists, rock stars, movie stars, dance troupes, theater people boycotting Israel? Not coming to Israel? So yes, we all know that Stephen Hawking decided this past month, in a highly publicized, not to come to Israel. Does that hurt? Of course it does. But if you want, I'll pull out from you, I should have brought it, the concert schedule for downtown Tel Aviv for this summer. There's not a major international artist that is not appearing in Park HaYarkon. Last summer it was Madonna, this summer she's not coming, and everybody else, and Leonard. Go down the list, Leonard Cohen. Living in Israel, we don't feel that the international campaign to boycott, to divest, to sanction, name me a major pension fund in the world that has really divested from Israel. Doesn't exist. There were efforts. Largely, the efforts have been defeated. The campaign to isolate Israel through boycott, divestments, and sanctions is there. It's a nuisance. It's not a strategic threat to the state of Israel. It has, to date, failed. It's a nuisance. It's not a strategic threat, and it has not, to this point, succeeded. Point number one. Point number two. You know, the Palestinians have spent the last 20 years going to every single international human rights organization, accusing Israel of the most horrible crimes against humanity. Israel's a human rights abuser. It's an occupier. It commits ethnic cleansing and genocide against the Palestinians. You're all familiar with these words. You know, these accusations ring hollow today, more than ever before, when you look at what's going on in Syria. It's much more difficult to make the argument today that Israel is a gross abuser of human rights when people see, without us having to launch propaganda offenses. People open their news at night and they see what's going on in Syria. It's very clear where human rights are being abused on a grand scale. And so for the one Palestinian who may lose his home or be arrested or be killed in demonstrations by Israeli security forces, there were 150 such people killed last night in Syria. And I think that message of proportions sinks in. It has to. It's impossible for it to be ignored. The violence that has become part of the Arab uprisings, the Arab upheaval, the gross abuse of human rights, puts into context and into perspective all these grand accusations of Israel's abuse of human rights. And I think that sinks in. Third of all, much of the campaign to delegitimize Israel over the last decade or so has been funded by European countries and European organizations. You can go down the list of the most prominent hard left organizations in Israel that have been at the forefront of the campaign to delegitimize Israel. Their funding almost all of it comes from the European Union. Their funding is drying up. The economic difficulties in Europe have led to a dramatic decline in contributions to organizations in Israel that have led the campaign to delegitimize Israel. Now, I'm not wishing economic ruin on Europe, but the fact that this campaign has had and will continue to have difficulty in raising funds makes an enormous difference. Fourth of all, you all know the word tsunami? Tsunami is a wave of water that comes and sweeps in. Tsunami, of course, has become a political term which means an onslaught, an offensive. There is no diplomatic tsunami against Israel. I remember last fall when Abbas was going to the United Nations to get unilateral recognition of Palestinian statehood. I remember the articles that all warned of a diplomatic tsunami against Israel. Oh my God, or if you know a little bit of Yiddish, oi gewalt, the world is coming to an end. There's a diplomatic tsunami that's about to roll in from the sea and swamp and flood Israeli diplomacy. And there's no diplomatic tsunami. The Palestinian campaign to delegitimize Israel at the UN has more or less been halted in its tracks. They got their vote. And what's happened since then? Nothing. So they got their vote. Has Israel's diplomatic universe collapsed? Have countries around the world closed their Israeli embassies? have Israeli envoys around the world. You'll ask Ambassador Adik, have they found themselves more isolated than ever? I don't think so. There's an elephant in the room. You know the phrase, an elephant in the room? Something you can't ignore? It's called the Hamas. And for all the recognition that Mahmoud Abbas can garner around the world in all the places where he can run his flag up over his embassy and claim that he represents a state, everybody in the world knows that Abbas barely controls the secretaries in his office, never mind the guards outside his office, never mind the street in downtown Ramallah, and certainly not Gaza City in Gaza. The claim that the Palestinian Authority represents the Palestinian people, and that it is marching forward towards a grand diplomatic victory, simply, it's not there. It's not true. It's uncomfortable for Israel, and it's uncomfortable for advocates and friends of Israel to see the various votes at the UN where the Palestinians rack up diplomatic recognition. But has that led to a collapse, a tsunami of Israel's foreign relations? Have countries in Europe or in Africa or in Asia or certainly America stopped signing bilateral cooperation agreements with Israel in science, trade, health, or culture over the last 6 months since the Palestinians passed their resolution at the UN? No. There is no diplomatic tsunami against Israel. Let us not bury our heads under the pillow and feel that the world is collapsing. It is not. Tell you something else. The notion that all that needs to be done for a grand peace to ensue between Israel and the Palestinians is for Israel to withdraw to the 1967 lines, the so-called Green Line, which is really the 1949 armistice lines, and that would bring about a new era of peace in the Middle East. Even the most unfriendly European diplomat doesn't really believe that anymore. They may not admit it publicly, but the notion that peace is simply around the corner and all it requires is Israeli withdrawal, Israeli acceptance of the 1967 lines, and that is the grand, simple solution. Serious people, serious thinkers don't believe that to be the case. There is no immediate, grand, simple solution to the conflict, and that is a sobering thought, but it's also an intelligent thought. It's also a complex thought, and that's important from Israel's perspective. And I'm arguing before you today that there is a more sophisticated understanding that is emerging, that this conflict can be ameliorated, can be kept in check, can move towards reconciliation and accommodation and coexistence only in the course of time, only in a slow and more incremental process. The notion that all we need is another handshake on the White House lawn, all we need is another secret negotiation in Oslo that would draw a line on a map, and both fewer and fewer people around the world, sophisticated people, truly believe that. So there is no diplomatic tsunami against Israel. My fifth point. The need for Palestinian recognition of Israel as a Jewish state, a demand that Prime Minister Netanyahu has put on the international agenda, is becoming more and more accepted and understood. Over the last 2 years, even Western leaders who are not Israel's best friends, such as former President Sarkozy of France and President Obama, specifically have adopted this Israeli demand that a peace requires Palestinian recognition of Israel as a Jewish state as part of their diplomatic agenda. Those lines, these words appeared in President Obama's recent speeches in Israel, and prior to that, in his speeches in Congress. Now, I want you to understand this well. This is a critically important point. And in many ways, I'll argue before you that it's Prime Minister Netanyahu's most important diplomatic contribution since he became Prime Minister again 5 years ago. Without recognition of Israel's right to exist, of Israel's raison d'etre, of Israel's place in the world as a Jewish state, any piece of paper the Palestinians sign setting borders between us and them won't hold. It won't represent true reconciliation. And this, for many reasons, this is the most difficult thing for Palestinians to accept. The fact that Israel's demand for recognition as a legitimate entity in the Middle East, as a place that represents long-standing, historic, meta-historic Jewish connection to the land of Israel is critically important. And I see it sinking in. As I mentioned, it's now part of formal American policy. This is an incredibly important diplomatic development. It represents an important gain for Israel. It's not something that Israel is going to give up on as a demand. It's not one of Israel's demands for entering negotiations. Israel places no preconditions on the reignition of talks between Israel and the Palestinians. Israel is not demanding that the Palestinians seek incitement. Israel is not demanding that the Palestinians stop attacking Israel at the UN around the world. Israel is not demanding A, B, C, D. They're not asking diplomatic recognition. Israel makes no preconditions whatsoever for entering talks. Israel is not putting anything off the agenda. All items are on the agenda. Prime Minister Netanyahu has made it clear that Israel will discuss any issue, borders, Jerusalem, refugees, settlement, any place, any time, with no preconditions with the Palestinians. But the end result, an agreement, a signature, Israeli withdrawal, anything that it might take in order to bring about a peace agreement with the Palestinians is dependent on Palestinian recognition of Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state in the Middle East. Never forget to mention that. My sixth point, which is even more important, is that a consensus has emerged in Israel on the Arab-Israeli conflict, on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, that in many ways was never there before. You all know that for the last several decades, Israeli society has been divided between right and left, between supporters of the Labour Party and supporters of the Likud Party, between those who were prepared to make significant concessions and withdrawal from the territories, Judea and Samaria and Gaza, and those who weren't. You know, today that's not the case. Every single public opinion poll taken in Israel shows that by and large, in principle, and as a matter of ideology, Israelis are overwhelmingly willing to make significant concessions to the Palestinians, perhaps even in Jerusalem, in order to bring about true, long-lasting peace between Israel and the Palestinians. But in practice, the same vast majority, I'm talking 75 to 80% of Israelis in polls, know that today it's not our fault that peace has not emerged between us and the Palestinians. The same vast majority of Israelis that's prepared theoretically for grand concessions to the Palestinians is absolutely opposed to making those concessions in the current circumstances, because they don't see on the Palestinian side any solid, authoritative representative who can secure a stable peace. We mentioned the elephant in Gaza. We mentioned the Palestinian refusal to recognize Israel as a Jewish state. We could go on and on about other Palestinian demands. There is not a there has not emerged yet Palestinian leaders with realistic, moderate expectations about what is obtainable in a peace arrangement between Israel and the Palestinians. And therefore, Israeli public opinion is not pressuring the government of Israel today into grand withdrawals or grand concessions. It's not there. There is no such pressure. There is no left in Israel demanding that the Netanyahu government tear down settlements or withdraw Israeli forces, because public opinion is very clear. Yes, in principle, there are dramatic things that we as a state, as a country, could do to bring about peace with the Palestinians. In practice, we're far from that, and this is not the time, and we do not have partners for that peace. The emergence of this Israeli consensus is critically important. It makes Israel today a more unified society than ever before. It makes Israeli leaders, it gives Israeli leaders the strength and the diplomatic confidence to stand up in world fora and present Israel's case in a very clear way. We are ready for great sacrifices for peace, but it requires a partner on the other side who is reliable, credible, stable, moderate, and willing to recognize Israel's place in the Middle East. So I say to you, we're winning. Point number 7. Israel has real, true friends in the world. Sometimes we get so caught up in tracking our detractors and focusing on our enemies and obsessing about our critics that we fail to overlook that there are people in the world like the friends and members of MIF and many, many others in the world who are Israel's true friends. Take, for example, the current government in Canada. Prime Minister Harper, Foreign Minister Baird are some of Israel's best friends in the world. And in international fora, after international forum, at the United Nations, at the United Nations Council on Human Rights in Geneva, at the International Atomic Agency in Vienna, at the G7, at the G8, at the G20, at the Francophonie, and I could go on and on and on. Canada has stood up, sometimes in a majority of one, to defend Israel's interests. Prime Minister Harper has said repeatedly that he doesn't care whether this brings him votes or costs him votes. He will stand beside Israel at every forum. Prime Minister Harper stood up to Sarkozy and Obama at the G8 and blocked communiques 2 summers ago at the G8 that would have been adopted easily, calling upon Israeli withdrawals of the 67 lines, or Israel to accept the 67 lines as the basis for negotiations. It's more or less the same thing. And such communiques were not adopted because Prime Minister Harper objected. And he's not the only one. Friends of Israel around the world are active. I'm talking to the converted here. You should not feel alone, because you're not. You are not alone. Go to the AIPAC conference in Washington. Go to the CIJA conference in Ottawa. Friends of Israel around the world have found their voice. And we have real friends, whether it be the Czechs or the Italians here in Europe or the Canadians in North America, evangelical Christians and others around the world. I say to you that we are winning, that we are not alone, we are not an isolated minority, and we shouldn't read the newspapers so much and take comfort in the fact that many, many people around the world who don't always have a voice through their mainstream press are there backing Israel. I find it astonishing to be among you this weekend and to have heard some of your personal stories. I'm amazed. Places I go, places I speak, to discover so many people, true friends of Israel, giving of their time, giving of their money, to advocate for Israel. Don't let the mainstream press get you down. We are the silent majority. We are winning. Okay, point number 8. Point number 8 is a lengthy discussion about the Arab world and the so-called Arab Spring. And I'm actually going to shorten my remarks here because I understand that Ambassador Deek is going to relate to this in greater detail in his upcoming lecture. So I'm going to be brief. But notice, the Iraqi army exists no more. The Syrian army is down to at least 50% of its size of 2 years ago. The Egyptian army, all of its 14 divisions, maybe 7 are in any way active, not corroded, corrupt, falling apart. The Arab military threat to Israel has evaporated. Arab societies, as you all know, from Libya and Tunisia through Egypt to Syria, and it'll yet, unfortunately, come to Jordan, are so convulsed with internal conflict that for the next 2 to 3 to 4 decades, they are going to be racked by such internal tensions and such internal economic disparities and needs that their ability to mount a coordinated offensive against Israel in the conventional military sense is simply gone. It's gone. It's gone. So before we start discussing all the threats and the emerging threats and the dangers that are posed to Israel from the crumbling of the old Arab architecture around Israel, first let's recognize that the conventional military threat against Israel has greatly disappeared. And that is a net gain for Israel. It has tremendous long-term significance. Now, we all know that there are new threats emerging. What was the authoritarian control over countries like Egypt, where the security services had penetrated every element in society. You couldn't burp, you couldn't breathe, you couldn't blow your nose without somebody in the security services knowing about it. That's all gone. Morsi doesn't have control over the streets of Cairo, never mind the sands of Sinai, and whoever emerges as the leader or one of the leaders in Syria towards the future will never have the same authoritarian control over the country that Assad's mukhabarat, his security services, had. So that creates potential for great conflict. We all know about the threat of weapon stocks, missiles spreading all over, new weapon systems coming into the region, whether it be from Iran or from Russia. All these pose security threats to Israel that Israel will have to deal with in the coming years and perhaps decades. But the conventional military threat, the Israeli fear that the combined armies of Egypt, Iraq, Syria are going to mount a coordinated offensive like they did in the Yom Kippur War against Israel, that's gone. That's gone, thank God, it's gone. And therefore I say to you, again, Israel is winning. Point number 9, in grand historical terms, of course Israel's winning. Look at the society that's been created in Israel. Look at the creativity of the Israeli community. Look at the vibrancy of life in Israel. I look at my kids. I have a son-in-law who's a software engineer in Israeli military intelligence. I have a daughter doing her PhD in genetics at the Hebrew University. I have a daughter studying architecture at Ariel University in Samaria. I have a son completing his bachelor's degree in computer science in high school, and he will graduate high school with his degree in computer sciences, and he has studied intensively 17 tractates of the Talmud, and he knows his Bible inside out and backwards. And I have two younger kids who are in younger grades, and I look at them and I see their contributions and their future contributions to Israeli society, and I look at their friends who are all doing similar exciting things. And one of my daughters is a little bit of an artist as well. And you look at this and you say, what a wonderful youth we have, what a powerful country we have. And I don't say this to gloat or to be racist, but it's important for us in terms of perspective to ask, what creative contributions has the Islamic Arab world around us made to the world over the last 100 years? What technologies have been bought by Facebook, Yahoo, Microsoft, and Intel from Saudi Arabia? What's the gross national product of all 40 Arab countries around us put together, leaving oil aside? And again, not because I mean to be denigrating or dismissive of the Arab world, and not because I want to gloat, but because I want to reinforce in our own minds how powerful we are, how vibrant a society, how creative a society Israel has become, how proud we ought to be, how right we are to be able to continue to claim that Israel is an honorable member of the world community and making contributions to that world. It's important for us to remember that we're winning. We have a wonderful country, and it will yet do great things for the Middle East and for the world. And I forgot, we now have gas. Milk and honey, we're still looking for the honey. And oil, I don't think we're going to ever find, although there is shale oil under much of central Israel, which could take another 50 years to extract. That's a very controversial issue in Israel. There are environmental groups opposing shale oil fracking, where you have to drill down under the ground, heat the shale rock to enormous temperatures, turn it into liquid, and then bring it out. I think we're 50 years away from being able to capitalize on that resource. But the gas from the newly found gas fields off the coast of Israel has already begun to flow, and Israel will yet become a net energy exporter. We all know how energy has distorted world politics over the last 50 years. There's no way, let's recognize for a moment, I don't believe for a second that the campaign to delegitimize Israel launched by Arab countries ever since 1973 would have really ever succeeded to the extent that it has, or had the residents, had the Arabs not had oil power. The energy advantage, the blackmail that Arab countries and their oil powers had of the world has distorted diplomatic discourse for 40 years. Maybe we're at the beginning of a new era of change, where America and hopefully eventually Europe will become less dependent than ever on oil from the Arab Middle East, and Israel certainly will become less dependent on that, and that's all a very good thing. You know that for most of the last 30 years, ever since Israel signed a peace treaty with Egypt in 1979, Israel's imported about 50% of its energy needs from Egypt, from the oil fields in Sinai. That has stopped. The radical Islamists blew up the pipeline carrying oil from Sinai to Israel. How many times in the last 2 years? Anybody want to take a guess? 16 times. 16 times the pipeline was blown up, and finally nobody's trying to fix it anymore. It's over. It's done with. It became too controversial in Egyptian politics. In fact, one of the items in which President Mubarak is on trial for in Egypt is because he sold oil to Israel. That's considered traitorous, and that's one of the indictments against him, is that he and his sons and others sold oil to Israel, which was a violation of Egypt's national honor. But we have gas. And finally, my 10th point. The heroism of Israelis should not be overlooked. Despite the fact that the world is open today to Israelis, and that Israeli doctors and scientists, engineers and professors can move really anywhere in the world, from Trondheim to Costa Mesa, California, from South America to Toronto, and get good jobs, and earn 5 times as much or more than they earn as a doctor, as a scientist in Israel, without having to do reserve duty in the military. And yet they don't. And yet, by and large, they stay in Israel. And we even have a phenomena today where high-tech specialists and doctors who 10, 15 years ago went abroad are now coming back to Israel because the economy in Israel is stronger and the country can give them the wherewithal to continue their research at a high international level. That heroism of Israelis is our greatest strength, and it hasn't ebbed. You would think that Israelis would be depressed or discouraged. I get this question all the time. One of the things I do in Israel is I represent the Canadian Jewish community in Israel. It's one of the reasons I spoke about Prime Minister Harper so much, because I know Canadian policy and Canadian leaders well. But I host many visiting groups of Canadian members of Parliament and people in the political sphere, and the question always came. I grew up in Toronto. So why did you move here? Given the threats, given the challenges, given the difficulties, given the fact that you could have continued a successful and comfortable life in Toronto, why did you move here? Now, I have a personal answer. We can discuss that perhaps later. My personal answer relates to religion and tradition and history and even Kabbalistic mystical notions of the return of the Jewish people and of God's divine presence to the land of Israel, but let's put that aside for the moment. The answer that most Israelis will give you is that Israel is, despite all the challenges, a fantastic place to raise your kids and to live a productive life and feel part of the enlightened Western world. And Israelis are not depressed. And all of those of you who visit Israel, and I've met some of you who visited Israel 20 or 30 times, know that even in the midst of all the adversity, the cafes are full, the concert halls are full, the museums are full, and Israelis live a life that is full of enthusiasm, vibrancy, commitment, and optimism towards the future. We don't believe that a new Middle East, to use that phrase, you're familiar with the phrase, the new Middle East, is emerging. In fact, just the opposite. With what's been going on over the last 2 years in the Arab world, the region seems to be regressing, not progressing. And despite this arc, or this ring of Arab instability around us, Israelis are tremendously optimistic about their future. I call that heroism. I call that optimism That's a core element in our strength. And that's one more reason, that's my 10th reason, why I say to you that we are winning. Okay, so now, to be honest, let me throw in a couple caveats. I know that this rosy, optimistic picture that I've described before you has a couple bugs in it. And first and foremost, in my mind, the greatest difficulty, or the one item that presents the greatest threat to Israel, is what I would call American strategic fatigue. America is tired. And there are many signs that America is withdrawing from engagement in the world, engagement in the Middle East. Obama has this phrase about leading from behind, which basically means not leading at all. And a Middle East absent American leadership is a scary place for Israel. And we see the way in which Obama mishandled the crisis in Egypt. I would argue with you that he's thoroughly, completely mishandled and missed every strategic opportunity to direct events in Syria. And we see deep, worrying signs of American disengagement from the region, and that is a source of great concern for Israel. Nothing is more scary than a Middle East without strong American leadership. So that's problem number one. The second serious problem that we see developing is that Israel could become a wedge issue in American politics. What do I mean by wedge issue? An issue that divides the major political parties. The notion that support for Israel could become a Republican platform, and the Democrats would be less pro-Israel. That's a tremendous danger. We have the same problem in Canada today, where Prime Minister Harper's Conservative Party is so strongly pro-Israel. The Canadian Jewish community is very concerned that it needs to bring the liberals along with them. We do not want Israel to become a wedge issue in American, Canadian, or Norwegian, or politics anywhere else. And to the extent that Israel is becoming a wedge issue, an issue that divides the political parties in America, that's also a great danger to Israel. Third great concern for Israelis is the decline of American Jewry. This is not the time and place for us to get into a sociological evaluation, but American Jewry is changing. It is assimilating. It is intermarrying. It is becoming ever more liberal. And those forces on the far liberal end of the spectrum have clearly become less connected to, less identified with, less willing to stand up for Israel, and those demographic trends are a concern. And fourth is what we discussed beforehand regarding the changing architecture of the region and the possibilities for greater border conflicts. We don't know for how long the border with Syria on the Golan is going to be stable. We have no guarantees that the border with Jordan will remain stable and quiet, although Israel is very supportive of King Abdullah, and King Abdullah is a close ally of Israel. No one knows how long that will go on for, so all those are all trends to the region, trends that worry us for the long term. What have I forgotten? Somebody help me out. Come on. Iran. I haven't said the word Iran once yet, until now. Did you notice that? Not once. Why not? Any Israeli diplomat who would stand up here in front of you would talk about the great threat that Iran poses to Israel and to Western strategic interests and to the Arab Middle East, right? It's a key part of any Israeli diplomatic strategic briefing. And yet I haven't said Iran once until now. Why? Because the Iranian threat is going to be dealt with. The Iranian threat is going to be dealt with. Sooner or later, and get ready, sooner or later, the Iranian drive to achieve nuclear weaponry is going to be stopped, and we're not going to apologize for it. So get ready. Get your gunpowder. Keep your gunpowder dry, and keep your weapons at your side, because Israel's going to need all the defense in the world from friends of Israel like yourselves. But have no doubt that failing Western action, effective, concrete action, which means American action, failing American action to stop the Iranians, Israel will act. I don't know, and I'm not going to pretend before you that I know whether that's next week, or next year, or next decade. I don't know. And anybody who says they do know is an idiot. I don't know. But I do know that there is no prime minister in Israel, not from Labor, not from Likud, not from Kadima, and not from Meretz. Were there to be a Meretz prime minister who would stand by and 70 years after the Holocaust allow the Iranian regime to wield a nuclear weapon and hang it over Israel's heads. And therefore, as great as the Iranian nuclear threat is, I say to you, it's going to be dealt with one way or another, and the world will be a better place. And catastrophe will not emerge, and world war will not ensue, and the Iranian threat will be dealt with. And therefore, my argument before you today has been the following. The overall strategic balance is in Israel's favor. When you take into consideration all the campaigns to undermine and delegitimize Israel and place them on one side of the scale, and take all the trends in the region and within the country that give Israel greater weight, greater internal cohesion, greater consensus, and place them on the other side of the scale. When you take the long-term trends that are worrying that I discussed, American strategic fatigue, the decline of American Jewry, the crumbling of the Arab state infrastructure, and put them on one side of the scale, and balance that out on the other side of the scale with Israeli creativity, heroism, and its strong network of support and friends around the world. The overall strategic balance is in our favor. We're winning. No one should leave this room, no one should leave this conference without feeling that we're winning and that we have many assets on our side. I'll tell you, from my perspective, you should know, as an Israeli, we're not crumbling. We're not falling apart. We don't walk around with our head between our hands all day and say, "Oy Gewalt, the sky is falling and the world is encircling us." No, we're winning. I hope you believe that too. And I hope that you continue to support us, as I know you will. Thank you.